New York and added the knowledge of modern astrophysics. And this vitality just fit the Berliners at the Kudamm by a new design.
In a way, unlike the early kind of participants of the IBA and Berlin, I inherited a condition which was not that of a metropolitan kind of condition, but that of a kind of really a very suburban one. And when I was there over the past year, visiting kind of with, having endless meetings with IBA kind of officials, I was told that's what really the people liked in Berlin, is not to live in a kind of condition which is urban, but that of a suburb. And it was very curious for me to kind of be invited after many years of trying. I've tried very hard for the past 5-6 years to really be allowed to actually do a competition in Berlin, but I didn't fit into any category because I wasn't a European and all these kind of problems. And then I did fit a category which was that of women. They really didn't know whether I should really fit the category of the East or the women aspect of it. So I'm sandwiched between the women on the block and the Polish people. They wanted Russians, but they didn't get them, so I was numbered with the Poles. I was, again, to remind me, I was introduced in, which I find, highly offensive, but I was introduced recently in New York City by Peter Eisenman to someone as the best ethnic architect, which meaning I'm an Arab, I'm a woman, and he said if you were only Jewish, you would have fitted all the bills. So on that kind of notion, can I have the first slide, please? And I will try to work this podium, which I can't stand, I never have been able to do. And we are currently working on 2 projects in Berlin, and I will skip all the kind of contextual stuff which has been covered by no, it's not 2 carousels, it's 1 at a time, please.
1 at a time.
Yeah, if you can eliminate this one. Thank you. So there were 2 projects which were kind of concurrently being worked on. One which is for the IBA, which is housing, and one which is an office building on a corner. So I've become a kind of, again, a corner specialist. Nor do I have only 1 corner, but 2 corners. And at the beginning for the Kudamm project, I really thought that would be most probably the smallest site I could be ever given to kind of design. And I've just been to Tokyo, and I discovered wrongly that I was given even a smaller site to work on. So the IBA project was first kind of discussed 2 years ago, and it was a very curious site which was kind of totally unhomogeneous. And after, again, about 6 seminars, we were told that there's only one way to do it, which was that to kind of complete the city block, which is kind of to make a kind of, again, a perimeter building, and that having again gone to many other meetings, we were told that perimeter building should be really a very low building, which is that of courtyard housing, because again, that's what the kind of the people required, and the women which are participant in this project and the Poles, kind of nodded their heads approvingly. So I said, well, we are on a kind of prominent street. We cannot really do this as kind of low rise houses with little courtyards. It will be too cute, for liking. And that what is the highest I could possibly go on this? What is happening here?
Bring it a larger length.
Oh, thank you very much. So I asked what is the kind of average height. I again take advantage of the fact I can't speak any German, and they don't understand me. I don't understand them, and I suppose it's a kind of advantage. So I asked what really is my maximum height and not my average height, and they said 5 stories. So I again said, is it really an average or what is it? And they said, no, it's an average. They put it in writing, and I went back and decided that for the average, meaning that one building could be 3 stories high and one could be 8 stories high. And at the beginning, they were slightly kind of not very amused by the idea, but eventually kind of they accepted the fact that I had to assume that the product which I actually knew, which are going to be designed on the site, they are as if they are really old buildings, so they're kind of part of the kind of an existing context because the only way you can deal with it. And the corner, which is the only kind of new element on that side, would be like an extrusion. So when it kind of leaves everything as if it was a kind of a historical context and extrude the corner, which is again a housing condition. What I found also very alarming about the situation in Berlin is that there has been no discussion whatsoever about the kind of quality of life in these particular apartments. They are governed by the fact that it is to do how much meterage you can get out of each apartment and whether they can get the subsidy from the government. These things I find really very curious because it's a major kind of public work which is to do predominantly with a new kind of housing, living condition in this part of the century. And these discussions were totally neglected. So in a way, our role in this project is not really that of a designer or an architect, but that of a manicurist, because obviously the IBA kind of officials are, they want to design the buildings, and we are only invited to slightly make them prettier or better looking. And I found a recent discovery upon my arrival yesterday that the plans are also unacceptable because the main elevation to the street, which is north facing, which is the main side, you cannot have on that side living rooms, and you can't have children's rooms. So it means that the kind of main elevation of the street has to be occupied by toilets and kitchens. And I think on that criteria, it's a very curious thing to do. So this project is really just being designed so it's in kind of very early stages. And this is not really very far from the wall is kind of over here, and the site is this. This is kind of an existing a hotel which is pretty horrendous. There's a little church over here, and this is kind of some shops, and there are fragments of kind of this is quite a beautiful building, and the fragments of buildings left over here. And then you have a major museum which is across the street. That's also one of the reasons we got away with the fact that we can build a building which is 8 stories high because of the height of this building. So this was one of the first diagrams which were given, that this is the site, this is the hotel, and this is kind of what we have to do, and this is parking. And they've had about 2 years to work on the parking. And again, recently we discovered that the parking for the site would have to go somewhere here, and they didn't even know the height of a garbage truck. So working for the IBA is a very curious thing. On one hand, we are obviously very delighted and everything like that, because none of us have built before, and it's a kind of a great thing to be allowed to do that. And I think also because that was the kind of the blackmail element of this condition, that because we haven't done it before, therefore we have to accept everything which they actually tell us to do. And I kind of personally find that pretty difficult to handle. So the given kind of height limitation is based on this church. As you can see, the church and the hotel have nothing to do with each other, and there is no reason why these things have to kind of really abide by this little church over here. Another solution to the problem, which was not a totally perimeter condition, but that of 2 courtyards. The halls are here, and the 2 women are over here. And I have been accused of being rather rude to one of them, because the building, which is eventually on this corner, crashed into her, one of her apartments. So there was more negotiations to kind of go through. So these are kind of very early studies of what had happened, which is these 2 buildings, the low building over here and the extrusion, which is on the corner, and that's what could have been dealt with the side, which is much more fragmented and really has nothing to do with this kind of gluing condition which exists all over Berlin. In a way, it's a great pity that Leo is not here, because he has always talked about the monster which was created by kind of modern architecture. But I think he should have confronted his own monster, which is created in Berlin, which is a kind of completely different animal in a way. So this is again the site. We don't know yet whether we have this part or not, because the IBA doesn't own it. And these are very early studies of the kind of the extruded tower, which actually comes out of these kind of 2 low-rise buildings. one which is ours, which is two beams, one which is commercial on the ground, and one which is elevated townhouses, which is on 2 stories. And the idea for the tower was that it acts more like kind of loft apartments, so the interiors are much more free. Again, that was not acceptable because we can't have studios, but they have to be really very kind of cellular accommodation. And as you can see, the length of this whole street is north facing, and this is the side where all the services have to go now. Some of these kind of early studies of the tower. And so kind of some of them could be made into more like 3 studio apartments. So that this implies that the low building, which is more like elevated townhouse, are for families, and these were really much more kind of more to do with kind of an urban living. I mean, unlike Peter, I forgot about Parker Morris a long time ago. I think I only kind of heard of it in my first year there, and we were told to bag it. These are, again, early studies about as you approach the street. It's more or less like Las Vegas, really. So these are the 2 beams, which are the elevated townhouses, the commercial strip, and the tower. And we can't have balconies either on the north side. And what we're supposed to do is to have kind of on the top this kind of children's playground, and we were told that children do not want to be up. They don't like heights. So in a way, I mean, it took me a while to discover that if you want to build in Berlin, or especially for the IBA, it's not what you actually are able to do, but you have to really get everything which you can do, which is always very difficult to get it out of them, because at the end you have to kind of fit it between all these confines and kind of limitations. Again, these are very early studies of this project. The kind of commercial street, here's the corner which is being lifted up, and this was kind of going to be an open air lobby as you approach this kind of townhouses. So this, as you turn the corner, this is facing the wall and the museum. And this is the back, which is facing the kind of courtyards and the gardens, which will be much kind of more transparent and has different kind of apartments. And it was at that point when I went to Berlin that we discovered that this part of the building, this portion of the building, actually does crash into my neighbor. So we had to, as you can see, the models didn't actually fit together. So we have to kind of come back and really do an amazing amount of kind of studies to be able to actually kind of not glue them together, but to operate this extrusion better. So what we finally, I hope this would be acceptable, which is that the building actually hangs over the kind of neighboring building. And they said, but this is never done by IBA. And one of them finally said, which I'm grateful to him, that maybe it is time they do that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether it was a victory or not, but we have many we will lose many battles, I'm sure. And I don't want to sound kind of negative about this, because it is a very interesting problem, but it is sometimes disheartening that we have to spend so much time to actually minimize anything which could be interesting in this project. This is the elevated now garden, so of course the ecologists love me for it, and this is the kind of one of the later permutations of the tower. And this is kind of, again, studies about as to when, how this actually extrusion begins to rest on the site. The landscape for that part of the kind of the thing, this is what we want it to be, the children's playground and the elevated garden, which is like more like open air rooms. And this is the flower beds, which are kind of slashing the site. the neighboring buildings and the kind of walkway or a path which intrudes on these cute little pavilions which have been planted there. The main discussions is, I mean, whether if there are children playing here, whether every mother in this block can watch them. And so it's going to have a very different preoccupation than ours, which is really more to do with the interest in how actually to invent a new kind of plan, which is very kind of minimized, and a new kind of living. And then I go to my other corner, which is on Kudam, which is an office building. And so this is the site, and I will point to it vertically because there is hardly any horizontal condition. This is where all this jetting club and all these rather peculiar events kind of take place. And this is a bit of contextualism, which is an English furniture store. And this was going to be an office building, which the site is this, 2.5 meters by 20 meters long. And they keep on reminding me that it's not a very economical project, and I don't know how 2.5 meters by 20 would ever be economical in their way of thinking. So the project was really more like a test as how much you can compress kind of this notion of compression in a kind of little, what we call slabette, which is kind of all these kind of crushed together to kind of form an office building. This is another kind of horror, which is in the back. And so this is the side which has been boarded, and we had to put everything here. And fly at the same time. So these are very early models, and what became a kind of really, again, a preoccupation is as to how this building can relate to the street, because the obvious solution was to put an elevator in one end and a staircase in the other end, and the street would become a corridor. And then this notion of relating to the street began to fragment, and and how to engage that became really kind of a very important issue. And at that point, we then started working with Peter Rice and Ovi Arabs, who I think were really ingenious in kind of helping us kind of resolve the notion of the structure, which doesn't have to necessarily land in so many places. I'm sure Peter would tell me I'm talking nonsense. So this is the very early kind of sketches, which shows how this building, which is on one hand really compressed, but on the other one, a hand shearing from the existing firewall. And the very early studies as to the many permutations which one can deal with this site. This is the kind of existing firewall, and how this kind of compressed building could actually begin to shear from the wall and to give this kind of condition on the ground and an entrance, and also this kind of a space which is not necessarily necessary to occupy inside the building. All the early studies. And how the kind of the structure began to change. One of the kind of very early diagrams as to putting kind of the elevator at one end of the building and using the staircase as a kind of a tie, which ties all the structural walls together. And what became really also very interesting is that every element in this product is really kind of has a particular function and a purpose, and that all these walls which are added on the side are all structural walls. So this is how the ground began to change. So the kind of the whole lobby condition is then, the corridor is eliminated. One of the structural walls actually lands on this ramp, which houses the services below and acts as a kind of a lit carpet to lead you into the building. And the stairs becomes a transfer stair, the other one becomes a tie. And then finally the curtain wall, which is a glass curtain wall, compresses all these kind of activities or these events within the building, which is offices, into one, which makes it into kind of a sandwich. So these are the elements, the ramp, which is to enter this glass box, the column from the kind of one of the structural walls, and the transfers, and this is the elevator. Looking at it from below, and through doing this gave us this kind of very tiny gap between the building and the new firewall, which you actually can see as you walk into the building. And as usual, we are always very guilty of doing endless nice drawings. So these are very early sketches. Seeing how all these kind of walls begin to act together. And these are very early studies about this sequence, which is on one hand as vertical, as kind of it rise from the ground, being the lobby, and these walls begin add up. The structure, which is could be a burundi, which is kind of cantilevered from these walls, or a hung structure, and the curtain wall and the two rooms at the top, which are kind of special rooms at the top of the building. The horizontal sequence, which kind of shows how these walls accumulate till the end, again, with them all compressed and covered by this glass wall. One of the drawings which we submitted for this kind of competition last summer was that, which shows that kind of the building of these layers, these kind of horizontal and vertical layers. The existing firewall. So this is the site, again, with the mural and the Jet-In Club relief. The first wall, which is a new firewall. The firewall and the ramp. The elevator added on. The transfer stairs, which transfers the kind of the circulation from the first floor to the ground. The second structural element, which is this other wall over here. The lobby, which is in blue. The beginning of the kind of a third structural wall and the cantilevered floors. And finally, all the kind of the compression of all these elements behind this curtain wall. So this gap, which is kind of left in the back, creates this condition, this sloping circulation, which was even approved by the fire department, but because if you throw a rope from here, it would land there, and therefore it means that the fire truck can actually. That was the most kind of animated meeting I've had in my life with the fire department, who couldn't speak any English, and I couldn't speak any German, so he had to do everything by noise. And he had a little kind of fire truck with him to explain to me how this could be done. And you can imagine the noise he had to make to show me that if you run from here to there on the floor and there's an explosion, that there should be no partitions and so on. This lasted for 3 hours. So this is, within all these kind of walls, this is the staircase, which becomes also a structural tie, and you can see through the tiers of this transfer stairs. So you come down here to the first level floor, and then you transfer to this, into the glass box, and out into the street. And through that kind of hall, this kind of gap between the wall, which is where we are, and this wall, there's this kind of special room which emerges from that in that space. The plans, the basement, which is for the services, where the elevator goes all the way down, and you can put all the kind of rubbish cans. It's a preoccupation of burning rubbish. And this is the tarmac-lit ramp, which was used in this glass box, the transfer stairs, and all these different floors. And in a way, another kind of thing which we were lucky with, because of this fire condition, we don't have to make any kind of cellular partitions within this building. So this, as you arrive and you walk into the entrance, the glass room in its very early stages with this kind of solid wall, the tarmac floor. So this is as you arrive at this kind of dark space and you arrive into this lit room. A section at that point showing how the structure goes all the way down the service room below, which actually lights also the floor, the entrance, and the beginning of this staircase, which acts as a kind of structural tie. Again, one of the very early sketches, looking at this building from below. And the plans in total, all the way to the top, where we also wanted to have more like a kind of a neon park, it being in Kudam, and economically speaking, we couldn't really have a kind of a roof terrace, but we will try to. And the way the curtain wall, which I'll go through later on, operates, that as the building goes up, all the kind of floors begin to expand, because this is the 2.5 by 20 condition, and then it cantilevers over the kind of pavement over here. As this floors begin to get bigger, again, the curtain wall begins to shear from the actual floors, and the gap in between is a glass floor. One of the early diagrams of the arrangement of the interiors. And thanks to Michael Wolfson and Piers, these kind of perspectives, which I insisted on them becoming increasingly more abstract, became even incomprehensible to me. They get worse. And I still don't know what that is. You can have the next. I'm sorry, it's sideways, and I apologize to Peter Rice, who has helped us really a great deal with this. I mean, they're unfortunate to inherit us. This shows kind of the basic principle of the structure and how, in a way, has helped that this building, it's, even if it's very small, I think the reason it became actually very clean is because every wall had a kind of particular task. The blueprint, which is the kind of the section. I have to admit it's a laborious blueprint. The staircases, the elevators, and these are kind of all the lobbies, which are kind of contrary to the floors, which get bigger at the top, actually get smaller. The back, which is, this is another kind of really a section cutting through the back of the new firewall, the entrance and the transfer stairs and the room at the top, which is, this is the gap, which at the very early stages the developer wanted to eliminate because it's air, you don't get money for air. And these are the studies for the various elevations. The back, the main kind of curtain wall elevation, the glass elevation. There's another kind of glass elevation in the front showing the gap, the elevator, and all the different balconies for leisure and for fire. And these are kind of, they look like dentures, but they are balcony studies. All the different balcony studies for the front and the back. And the Boeing curtain wall, which we are facing incredible problems with. And this is another sequence which is not to do, Clay has insisted that this was done by a computer, and it really wasn't. It's thanks to Piers again, who spent hours trying to imitate a computer, and which shows the building as you move around it from kind of frontally sideways, as the curtain wall begins to kind of compress the interiors, and how it's seen in the front as you move to the side and from the kind of side elevation. Again, one of the early studies of this kind of compressing element, the curtain wall, and how it begins to actually shear from the wall or from the floor slabs. So as I said earlier, as the floors kind of get bigger and they go above this kind of gap is glazing. The curtain wall. Early studies of the section and that kind of the curtain wall detail. So this is the section with kind of the panels going into the kind of the base of this kind of rather complicated foundation. The section through the building and the detail of kind of the how the glass wall meets the glass floor. And have to kind of really thank again Hugh Dutton for helping us with this. And this is kind of the front of the building and shows this kind of room which becomes the only kind of really free element in this kind of compression, which goes also at the back. The curtain wall detail, the glass wall and how it meets the glass floor and the floor slab. A close-up of that condition. I'm going back to kind of the rotation drawing. So this is kind of frontally when the glass is not lit. Another early sketch of that building. A relief model to kind of really study the curtain wall again, which we're trying to do more of those because we felt that it's the only way we can resolve this kind of bowing condition. And as you move around the building, so as you approach it from the main street, and as it kind of moves around, and or you move around it, and you see it sideways, where this kind of a new firewall protrudes through the side. The sections and the back elevation, which will really only be seen by a worm in the next door apartment. The elevation and the second floor and the street. And this is the drawing which has freaked every curtain manufacturer completely out. And finally looking at it in the middle of the night. Thank you.
Next, I'm speaking myself, and I will show mainly one Berlin project, which is not a building, which is a city highway sound barrier project. We did with the architectural lab in Berlin, which I'm running with Christoph Lang, who is one of our guests, and Peter Rice from Oberalp. I think when I mentioned before about the choice of the lecturers, this is very much a dedication to Peter Rice, who is involved in a lot of projects in Berlin, and he's really the one who makes impossible things possible. Peter, I can't see you. You are here? Yes. Okay. So, Peter said he wanted to I speak, but he will give answers if there are questions. Can we start? Before I show this project, something is wrong.
What is wrong?
It's not your lecture.
You're pressing the wrong button.
Okay. Anyway. I think it starts with the
The other way around.
Sorry, I just wanted to show that very quick. Because I'm from Berlin and I did build several things in Berlin, I also was involved in the pilot project for the International Building Exhibition, but I went out because I couldn't agree with the way the Iberdrola or the pre-Iberdrola with the city. The proposals had all to be 3-story houses, and I think for a city one has to have high density, one then can have lower spaces or houses behind that, but at the street side one has to have high density. So very short, I'm not very much working in housing anymore. So I do projects which are more research projects or experimental projects. This one was one in the city of Berlin, facing east in the west, and there was a pylon left over of a pedestrian bridge over a street, and they couldn't do anything with that, so they asked me to do something, to design something for that. And because it's in the west and it is facing east, and the client was an American, I thought I would like to have something which refers to the Russian constructivists. So what I took was not Tatlin's tower, but the angle. They always used Leonidov, Tatlin, and so on, which they also have in their posters as a sign of power. And I proposed a restaurant which is now done, but they changed it so much in the end that they only show a bit under construction. Another project just to show a bit how the areas in Berlin are too. This is a land in Berlin, and I did a small house which is an energy research house. And I also wanted that because I wanted that it is very colorful, that the people can cover it if they don't like it. So, another bit I did was a park in Berlin, which mainly was an access and hidden objects in the landscape. Was at the same time for children as well as for adults. So that was kind of introduction, and that all have been pre-London designs before I came to London. So this is LA, this is not Berlin, but I show that photograph because the city highway barrier we designed, I think one can find use everywhere for it, not only in Berlin, but Berlin has a lot of city highways, and the 50s, late 50s, and the beginning of the 60s, they thought every empty space has to be filled with an highway. Even when there was no empty space, they damaged houses. But for the people who were living close to those highways, the situation is really incredibly bad. So this shows how close the highway is running to the houses. And normally, sound barriers are looking like that. They are high concrete walls, and they only make the situation for the people in the houses worse. So what we thought is one has to do something else, and this was just a quick sketch to show it again, one of the earlier studies. That we thought we have to have an object which is sculptural, and which one can act and put along the highway, and an object, and we wanted to have a mixture of a sculpture and a technical object, an object of high quality. That's why we called the project Emily, after the figure on the Rolls Royce, and also because of that shape she has two hands length. And the other bit was dove wings. That was an early sketch. And another thing was the running fence by Crystal, which is for me a very beautiful long element running through the landscape. There's only one thing why one can't do the thing. First, it will always be a wall in a city. The second bit is that by passing that with a car, you could get a heart attack because of the regular appearing masts and bits in between the masts. So one has to think. So another thing I would like to refer to was ways through a cornfield or alleys where trees are changing them, never similar. So this wing object did have different, should have different functions. One was to keep the sound away. Another one was to gain energy by absorbers, and we developed an object which is an absorber object. The sculpture is an absorber object, and we use the mass, the fluid which is going through that, as the mass which you need to kill sound. This is a typical situation in Berlin. This was an early elevation and testings on site, and another bit was that this element could have different angles to the road depending how close the houses are to the highway, and you can see different angles. And that would help that when you go by car, that you don't get a heart attack, or that disturbs your heart rhythm. More training on all kinds of situations close to sports fields where the noise is a big problem too. And we try to find out construction different angles. Again, and we thought first of a mechanism where you can fix the Emily object in a certain position, but that you can change that. We later found out that it's not necessary. By the way, on this project, Matthias Sauerbruch and Carlos Villanueva studies. Then it has to do with running along, so I go through very quick through a sketch. And it should have changing colors, so not only changing angles, also changing colors to help against those frizzy bits. So this project had several stages. After the stage you have seen just, there came a second one where Peter Rice really came to action. And Peter, I ask you whether you would like to explain it or whether I should continue. We looked for construction which end of production method which makes it possible to mass produce that object, because the problem of the object is that it is quite expensive, even it gains energy in the end, which then should have been delivered to the houses close to it. So Peter Rice proposed a method of bending metal and producing pieces without having a huge factory for that, which you can bend in a line, and also which you can cut in pieces, and when you put those pieces together, they in the end give the complete object, and they are self-stable. So the trick with that is that it is cut out of a toroid, and the toroid has, as you can see, a double curvature. So those both curvatures together formulate stability. And those are first paper models of trying to show that rough, to show the double curvature and find out which possibilities. And then overall made a computer service which I now show. The back is fine. But the whole object is self-stable, except from the back spine element. Anyway, again, the idea behind that from the ideology is that one can't put things in a bad situation. One has to do something very beautiful, and one has to look for the highest standards in that. That means, for me, from the aesthetic to the direction of art, and on the other side from the function to really the best technology, the best instruments.
obviously been a great pleasure to have them, particularly as you're almost gainfully employed as opposed to earlier days. I should say to those of you who haven't been in the building yet that a good many, if not all of the images that you've seen are on exhibition in the bar and members room and will be so for the next while. We're also hoping possibly to produce a document which will contain the various projects that you've seen, and one or two more which we spoke of earlier, which are yet to come. And perhaps if that particular microphone is working, we will have it automatically because the script is already with us. Thank you very much.